Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Hello and welcome back to another Aspects of Archaeology. Now today's Aspects of Archaeology is something of an answer to a frequently asked question here at Archaeosoup Towers, and this is with regards to a certain piece of terminology. Archaeologists and people in other fields seem to use the word palimpsest quite frequently. But what exactly does palimpsest mean? In order to understand what it means, we should probably first ask, where does the word palimpsest originate? The word originates in ancient Greece and Rome. Indeed, Cicero himself used it in passing to describe a writing implement. These were usually wax or clay upon a wooden board in which messages could be inscribed using a stylus. They were handy and durable, and more than this, they could be reused. Employing the other end of the stylus, the flat scraper, it was possible to erase letters and diagrams. However, a lazy eraser may leave something behind, and a palimpsest may contain traces of previous messages in the wax. This concept of the ghosts of former writing carried through into medieval times, when high-quality words were written upon animal skin, also known as vellum. This medium, along with the ink, was very expensive, and scribes, for example copying down a gospel, couldn't afford to make a permanent mistake. If they did misspell or spill ink, they would employ a knife to scrape away the blemish. Occasionally, as with the palimpsest, these scrapings, this story of the page, can still be examined and observed on medieval manuscripts today. So, I hear you cry, what does a Roman writing implement have to do with archaeology? Well, it turns out it was a very useful concept indeed. Imagine you have just finished and are reviewing your latest excavation over a well-earned pint. Or perhaps you've just received the latest aerial photography of a site you're interested in. Or maybe you've just finished conducting a geophysical survey, like magnetometry. The plans, photographs and data which you gain from this work appear to show anomalous elements. Perhaps they're out of line with main features on the site, or indeed appear to be completely different in how they're constructed and in their general form. What are you to make of these features? Is there a problem with your data? Well, an enterprising soul decided to make use of the concept of the palimpsest. Perhaps this was a good way to think about archaeological sites. You see, people don't tend to bulldoze land flat when they decide to build something new. Remnants of previous times will remain, and indeed sometimes people even live in amongst the ruins of their forebears. In much the same way that you can write upon a chalkboard without it being perfectly clean, archaeological sites build up in this way. They are new expressions in the same space, never fully disappearing. The features of these landscape palimpsests can be used to date one another, relatively speaking, in much the same way as a Harris matrix, with what has gone before being beneath what comes later. And though often complicated, these overlaps are crucial for understanding the development of sites over time. In Egyptology, the word palimpsest is used to describe the use and reuse of stone for carving over time. Graffiti, for example, builds up on top of images which were there before. And indeed, whole sections of monuments were occasionally reused, recarved by ancient Egyptians themselves. This concept feeds into more recent archaeology also, graffiti building up over time. Palimpsest also tells us stories about the urban environment, the ghostly outline of old structures, the use of buildings in times past. Just as with the ground, when a feature becomes redundant, we rarely erase it completely, and thus they remain, there for the keen observer and archaeologist to notice and interpret. The concept of palimpsest can also be applied to the relationship between different artifacts, gathered together through various episodes of time. An excellent example of this is the River Thames in London, where one needs a license to scour. Recently, a Roman brothel token was discovered, and it was, in effect, part of a riverside palimpsest. Here are some examples of how archaeologists apply the concept of palimpsest within their research. Dartmoor is an area of moorland in the south of Devon in the south of England. This national park is a complicated landscape where the ancient lives alongside the modern. Nestled across the landscape are towns and villages which have grown up through time. Dotted all around are monuments and ruins, from the 20th century right back to the Neolithic. And of course this part of the world has an industrial heritage, notably in the realm of tin mining. It is in such environments that the concept of palimpsest has proven invaluable in helping to interpret and indeed separate out the myriad of features, cuts, marks, indentations and ruins which are left behind in this ancient and overlapping landscape. Dartmoor is a huge and complex palimpsest. Probably the archetypal urban palimpsest would be the Forum in Rome. Here, not only have people continued to live since Roman times, but also many modifications and changes were made during Roman times. It is only by understanding the Forum as a complex palimpsest that we are able to understand and separate out the features, the architectural elements, and the different phases, the appearance of Rome through time. A similar application of palimpsest can be made in other cities, such as Detroit, Michigan, in North America. Here, a French colonial fort was built, modified, and eventually obliterated by the modern city. The concept of palimpsest can be used to map the fort's location to city streets as they were in later times, and thus it is not lost. Sometimes, archaeological excavations uncover the remains of prehistoric camps, and more specifically, the remains of tools being used to perform certain activities within those camps. More often than not, we not only find tools, the useful element, but also the flakes from the rocks which were discarded in order to make the tools originally. With meticulous effort, the relationship between these flakes and the tools can be reconstructed to original stone cores. And in turn, the relationship between the creation of the tool, the function of the tool, and the person who used it are all connected by a complicated palimpsest of activity. Repeated activities within camp can be mapped out, and the social dynamics of a camp can be understood more via palimpsest. Carlisle Cathedral in the north of England is a remarkable architectural palimpsest. From end to end, this building looks very different. This is because of architectural styles changing over time. Within, an off-centre arch and the ghostly outline of a former roof, amongst other things, show where a smaller cathedral has been augmented over time. Walk the length of the cathedral outside and change becomes even more obvious. Bizarrely, the nave of Carlisle Cathedral is absolutely minute. It positively looks like a back-to-front church. Most other cathedrals have huge naves to accommodate massive congregations. Carlisle suffered at the hands of Oliver Cromwell in the Civil War, who took stone to augment fortifications. This cathedral wears its history on its sleeve. So, there you have it. Palimpsest. Not a method or tool per se, but rather a concept that allows archaeologists to better understand the nuanced and complicated relationship between different aspects of the archaeology that they uncover, from sites and the way that sites have developed, right the way through to graffiti and how that has built up over time on buildings, and indeed the structure of buildings and how they change over time. The palimpsest is an idea which enables an archaeologist to talk about the narrative of a site, an artifact, or a place, and put it into a visual story, a timeline which makes sense and is easy to communicate. A very useful concept. So, palimpsest. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, feel free to comment below if you have any ideas or thoughts leading on from it. Of course, please do feel free to click subscribe above if you want to find out more about archaeology. And of course, check out our other videos on the YouTube channel or on Archaeosoup.com. While you're there, why not click like on Facebook or follow us on Twitter to keep up to date with news stories and indeed any new videos that we put out. So, until next time, thank you very much for watching and take care. Bye bye. Just in case they blow off.